Mr. Eiser's House of Horrors, Mysterious Nurses, and Eerie Occurrences. Throwaway here is being a cop. I don't want any of this to come back and bite me on the arse. I'm not sure who I can talk to about this. You tend to find us cops don't really talk about the job too much, so thought the anonymity of the internet would help me get it out there. There's an address I had to visit today. It's been on the radar for the last week, but as the call was only regarding noisy house improvements, it had been bumped down the priority list, staffing issues and all that, until today. The neighbor called in a panic. Seemed like the noisy home improvements had turned into noisy domestic violence. I was the only one available, so had to respond alone. The neighbor told me that they had heard banging and screaming, but only knew of the one person living there, a middle-aged man called Mr. Eiser. I went next door and rang the bell, but it wasn't the man that answered. To my surprise, a nurse answered the door. She took a bit of talking around, but eventually let me in, but only after I pressed her. This is the bit where it got weird. I'm sure you've heard that after a few years in the police force, you get a kind of spidey sense, as we call it. You just know when something is up. Well, this spidey sense was ringing as soon as I got through the door. The nurse guided me through the darkened corridors to Mr. Eiser. The room was filled with tools. Spades and pickaxes were the main ones, and the floor covered in brick dust. No damage anywhere that I could see, though. Another nurse stood over Mr. Eiser. She didn't even look up as I entered. He was slumped in a chair, wild-eyed and sweating. I tried to ask him if he was okay, to explain what happened. The man pretty much shrieked in my face, yelling at me to stay out of his house. He kept repeating it again and again until one of the nurses ushered me out of the room. I asked her what was wrong with him and how long she and the other nurse had been caring for Mr. Eiser. She simply told me a good while, and that he was suffering for a degenerative brain disorder. I told her that the neighbor had heard noises and called the police, to which she told me that sometimes Mr. Eiser ranted and raved and needed to be sedated. As she turned me to the door, I asked quickly about the building work. She told me that work was being done by a building firm, and that was that. I dropped by the neighbors and explained that everything was okay. I was unhappy with the outcome at Mr. Eiser's and was even more concerned once I spoke to the neighbor. She said that Mr. Eiser has never had carers. In fact, she hadn't seen anyone enter or leave the house for months, builders or nurses. I've had the worst headache since. No crime had been committed, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease I had. I couldn't go back in there, but I couldn't stop thinking about it for the rest of my shift. I'm going back there tonight to watch the place. I don't know what's going on in there, but it's not normal. I'll report back after tonight. Update. Okay, finally got a chance to update this. It's a big update too. The area is pretty rural, and those two houses are the only ones on the road, meaning I couldn't exactly park the car outside without suspicion. There is a field opposite which leads onto woodland. So I parked the car a few miles back and walked through the woods once it got dark to watch from the edge of the field. The majority of the curtains were still open and the lights on. Mr. Eiser moved slowly from room to room in an aimless fashion. All he did was move back and forth. His movement seemed odd, unnatural, as if he fought against each movement he made. It could be the effects of the drugs. I'm not entirely sure what they used on him earlier. The nurses were also present and moved in an equally aimless fashion. I tried to make out the name of their home help supplier, but it was too far to see even with the binoculars. Looked like a rising sun. They constantly moved around the property without interacting with anything or each other. The first thing that truly unnerved me was catching the shadows of the nurses as they passed by the light of the lamps. They didn't match either of the nurses. Both of their shadows were elongated, their limbs stretching far further than their physical equivalent, and almost playing catch-up with their actual movements. The second thing that unnerved me was that when I went to look at Mr. Eiser's shadow, the lights went out. All of them simultaneously cut out somehow. A light was still on at the neighbors, so I ruled out a power cut. I scanned the house again, trying to pick out any further details in the moonlight. One of the nurses was stood at an upstairs window staring right f-king at me. There was no way they could have known I was there. It was full dark and I was well hidden. I don't think I've ever ran so fast in my life as to get back to my car. If they hadn't seen me before, then my flashlight disappearing into the woods would have made sure. As soon as I got back to the car, I called it in. Within 20 minutes, another car arrived. Only officer on duty and had to come from another call. We rolled up to the house to find all of the lights back on. Knocking on the door provided no response, and when the other officer turned the handle, he found it to be unlocked. They were gone. Fuck knows where or how, but the house was completely empty. At this point, the other officer started firing some accusations at me of being overtired or drunk. I managed to convince him otherwise. I'm exhausted right now, but I know what I saw. We searched the property and found that the door to the basement was chained shut. A quick use of bolt cutters opened it. The dust that trailed through the house coated it, dust covering everything. What the builders were doing was quickly evident. One of the walls under the house had been excavated, large enough for a single person to squeeze through. The other officer went in, far enough to almost be out of sight of my flashlight. When he came back, he described what was there. It opened up into a slightly larger room with a hole in the center. Where the hole went, he couldn't tell as it was too dark and too deep. We secured the property and made trails for office. The neighbor couldn't help much, as again they hadn't seen anyone apart from ourselves. So, what we've now got is a missing person which has been briefed to the department and should soon be out with the media. As for the hole, the area where I live has a rich mining history, and God knows how many old tunnels are left down there. Looking at old records, a shaft does run nearby, but we don't have the equipment to go down there. The department has called in a cave rescue team to go down and scout it out for us. Until they arrive and come back with something, I'm sat on it until more details come back in. When I hear about either the missing Mr. Eiser or the results from the caving team, I will update accordingly. Until then, stay safe everyone. Update 2. Just a very quick update to keep everyone in the loop. Cave team are currently on their way, about 6 hours out last time I checked. The local news broadcast the details of Mr. Eiser this morning, and it's working far better than expected, and not in a good way. The department is currently receiving waves of panicked callers saying that they've spotted Mr. Eiser and the nurses. The problem is that we are receiving 10 to 15 calls at a time, in completely different parts of the local area. Officers are currently out responding to the calls. I'm on my way to one too. I don't know what is going on, but current theories are that it could be a Mars psychosis. We're beyond busy, but I will update as soon as I possibly can. Update 3. I don't know how to describe what just happened. The only word I can think of is madness. I attended the house of a young couple who reported seeing Mr. Eiser and the 2 nurses. I turned up expecting them to tell me that they saw them pars by the house, but the couple are out of their minds telling me they were in the house. The young lady said that she heard a rhythmic humming coming from their back bedroom and went to find out what it was. She said the old man was crouched in the corner with the 2 nurses stood beside him humming. She called her husband, but by the time he ran from one side of the house to the other, they were gone. The pair of them were wild with terror. I told them to stay put and stay in the house, but their bags were already packed. They left as soon as I did. Obviously this is impossible, but the radio is going crazy with reports of the same thing. Even officers are now reporting it. Reading through the comments on here and looking back on my initial visit to the house, as crazy as it sounds, my only explanation is that they influenced me in a way so subtle that I was convinced that leaving the property was my own actions. This will be my last update for a while. Officers are dropping off duty when we need them the most, so I'm up to my neck in it. I'm to accompany the cave team when they arrive. Hopefully I can start to get some answers then. Update 4. Very short one, but just to let everyone know I am still here. Things are going to shit here. Most of the population has left in terror, including the police chief. We're currently operating under a complete media blackout. It's all we can think of to stop the psychosis spreading. There aren't many of us left here now, but the cave team have just arrived. I just hope I can keep them calm enough until we get to Mr. Eiser's house. Update 5. At Mr. Eiser's house now, the lights were still on and the place still empty. I double-checked to see if the neighbor was home, but I can only assume they have left too. The basement was still as we left it, and there was no new footprints in the dust. The feeling down there is just disgusting now. The atmosphere is heavy. That's the only way I can describe it. Like the air is thick with fear. It feels like something is pressing on my shoulders, trying to crush me into the earth. The cave crew wavered at the top of the staircase. I had to practically beg them to come down. They're down there now. I've got their guide ropes attached to a weight next to me. I assume they are still going deeper as the rope is still feeding out of their lines. I've got another officer heading over now. She's bringing specialist equipment for controlled explosions in case the cave crew need extra access below. The calls about the sightings have nigh on died. I don't think there's anyone left to call us. No officer has been able to find even a shred of evidence that Mr. Eiser or the nurses have been at any of the addresses that have been investigated. All we can do is carry on and hope that someone finds him soon. Update 6. The lines have just gone slack. Tried calling down to them, but no response. Other officer will be here in a few minutes. We'll wait until then to go in to investigate. Update 7. Other officer has arrived. She says that officers are moving on a location 78 miles away. Mr. Eiser and the nurses have been confirmed wandering through woodland by a local hunter. I've pulled the lines out. They came all the way out with no resistance. Looks like knife marks on each rope. Either someone cut them or they cut them themselves. It's not unknown for those exploring caves to cut ropes if they present a danger to the owner. I'm heading down with the other officer now to find them in Arsist. We'll have no reception. We'll update when I can. Update 8. Whatever is going on down there, I'm glad to be out. We followed the footsteps of the cave crew as they descended the shaft. The deeper we went, the more the air seemed to throb. That's the closest word to how I can explain it. The cave crew are dead. I don't know what happened, but it looks like they cut their own ropes then started into a sprint down one of the side shafts. After about 100 m, the floor had collapsed into another mine below. They were crumpled at the bottom. Whether it was deliberate or an accident, I don't know, but something either chased them or made them do it. We're currently tooling up to go back down and follow the shaft further. There's something down there, and I think it could be the key to whatever is happening. My head is pounding from the atmosphere, but perhaps tonight this could be over. Update 9. I feel like I am going to die. My bones feel brittle as if they could just splinter inside me at any moment. We found what was left of Mr. Eiser. I have no idea what that thing is that those officers are going after, but it isn't Mr. Eiser. I don't even know if what we did will stop it. I can only hope that what we've done will at least weaken its influence. I am unsure whether Mr. Eiser had done it on purpose or perhaps he had been insidiously manipulated by the thing in the mine. But he had not only tunneled down into the old mines, but he had deliberately dug further at the end of the shaft. What was there was not the work of any human. 3 large statues stood in the middle of an atrium, at least twice my height. I recognized the 2 outer statues immediately. They matched the shape and build of the nurses' shadows. Their long, spindly arms reached down towards the floor, and the points of their fingers, elongated fingers, only just stopped short of scraping the ground. The statue in the center was beyond description. The best way I can explain it to you is that it was large and hunched over, with a face and tusks like that of a boar. I truly hope I never see anything like it again. The unnatural aura which emanated from it hurt my eyes to look at it for too long. At the base of the statue was Mr. Eiser. He was badly decomposed, much worse than you would expect. He looked like he died months ago. The throbbing atmosphere was at its peak in the statue room. It continuously bombarded us, as if attempting to pound our bodies and minds into jelly. I honestly don't know how I held out. The other officer wasn't so lucky. We had rigged the explosives up to the statues as well as further up the shaft. It was the only thing we could think of doing, thinking that if we destroyed the statues then it could break whatever powers they had. The atmosphere had lessened by the time we had retreated up the mine shaft, but whatever damage that throbbing had done was too much for the other officer. She ran back down towards the room and triggered the explosive, sealing herself in with them. The resulting burst of soil and dust blocked my view of what happened to her or to the statues themselves. The tunnel is resealed now, and the atmosphere seems to be dissipating, but I do not know if it can reverse or destroy whatever power the imposter Mr. Eiser has. I'm currently attempting to get a response on any of officers who had gone to apprehend Mr. Eiser and the nurses. Hopefully there is now light at the end of the tunnel. Update 10. This is going to be my last post. There's nothing else I can do. The officers couldn't catch Mr. Eiser or the nurses. The hunter that reported the sighting is currently being held by a psychiatric ward. They found him scrabbling on his knees in the woods, trying to burrow down into the earth with his bare hands. All I can say is that I'm sorry and that I tried my best. Whatever Mr. Eiser is now, it is still out there with those nurses. All I can hope is that whatever malign influence they held has now been weakened by the tunnel collapse. I like to think that my colleague didn't die for nothing. The house will be demolished and the pit refilled. I received an image from /u/atomicmzl. I don't know how this vision came to them or where they are based, but it appears that others are already feeling the influence. I have included the image below as some sort of visual identifier. http://i.imager.com/op3sup.jpg. Please, if you do come across them, do not approach them. If you hear a rhythmic humming, then please leave wherever you are as fast as possible. Do not investigate. Do not try to get photos or videos. Just get out. If you are foolhardy enough to go after them, then, in your last moments of sanity, at least remember that I tried.